My name's Nora Thompson. Tonight, like most nights since arriving in Monte Carlo, I found myself sitting alone at a small cafe on the edge of the bustling casino square. It's a far cry from the luxurious life I was born into, but after graduating from a fancy college stateside, all I wanted was a simple break. My dad, he owns half the globe it seems, from hotels to tech firms. I use my mom's last name, though, to keep things real, to keep the vultures at bay. The night was cooling off when he walked in. Daniel looked like he owned the place, or at least like he thought he did. Swaggering over with a confidence that I guess comes from wearing a suit that costs more than most people's rent, he pulled out the chair opposite me without asking. "Mind if I sit?" he finally said after already sitting down. His smile was all charm, probably practiced. "Looks like you're already sitting," I replied, barely looking up from my coffee. He chuckled, the sound a bit too smooth. "I'm Daniel. And you are?" "Nora," I said curtly, giving him a quick once-over. Not my usual type, too polished, but admittedly, good-looking. "So, Nora, what brings a girl like you to a pricey haunt like this all by yourself?" His tone had a touch of a tease, and I wasn't sure if I was amused or annoyed. "Just enjoying my coffee," I answered, keeping it vague. "What's your excuse?" I could say business, but I'd be lying tonight. "Let's just say I'm scouting for something interesting, and looks like I might have found it," he said, his gaze steady on me. I raised an eyebrow. "Hope the coffee lives up to your expectations then." Daniel laughed. "Something tells me it's already exceeded them." I wasn't here to make friends, definitely not looking for a fling. "Look, I'm not one of those girls who fall for lines, if that's what you're aiming for. And I'm certainly not interested in whatever game you're playing." "Who says I'm playing a game?" he asked, his voice lowering slightly. "Experience," I replied. "You sit down, uninvited, start with a line, expect what? A phone number? A date?" He leaned back, looking genuinely amused now. "You're tough. I like that. Not looking for a number, just conversation. But if it's too much, say the word, and I'll vanish." I considered him for a moment. Monte Carlo was beautiful, but lonely. Maybe a little chat wouldn't hurt. "Conversation is fine. But keep it light." We talked for a while, the conversation surprisingly easy. He didn't press for personal details, and I didn't offer any. As the night grew deeper, I realized that despite my initial reservations, I was actually enjoying the chat. Daniel wasn't like the typical guys who often tried to impress me with their wallets or connections. He had an air about him that suggested he was used to the finer things, but wasn't defined by them. Eventually, the evening cooled down, and it was time to go. "Well, Daniel, this was unexpectedly pleasant," I said as I stood to leave. "Surprised yourself, huh?" he asked with a grin. "Maybe just a bit. Good night, Daniel." As I walked back to my apartment, his words echoed slightly in my mind. Monte Carlo was indeed full of surprises, and perhaps, just perhaps, I'd stumbled upon one tonight. After that first encounter with Daniel, the nights in Monte Carlo seemed a bit less solitary. He had a knack for popping up wherever I was, whether I was checking out the local markets during the day or having a late dinner by myself. His persistence wasn't annoying, surprisingly, it was quite the opposite. Maybe because he wasn't pushy, he just seemed genuinely interested in being around me. One breezy evening, as I was watching the sun dip below the horizon, he walked over, 2 coffees in hand, and sat down beside me without a word. "Assuming I wanted coffee?" I teased, raising an eyebrow. He handed me a cup. "If I'm wrong, I'll drink both." "Good guess then," I said, accepting the coffee. We sat in silence for a bit, the sound of the waves filling the quiet moments. "You never told me what you do back in the States," Daniel finally broke the silence. "Didn't think it mattered," I shrugged. "I work. Right now, I'm just enjoying not working." "Fair enough," he chuckled. "Everyone's got a story, though. Don't you think?" Over the next few days, we fell into an easy routine. Daniel showed me parts of Monte Carlo I hadn't explored yet. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books, our favorite foods. He loved to argue about the best James Bond actor, staunchly defending Daniel Craig, while I was all about the classics like Sean Connery. One day, as we were strolling along the beach, he stopped suddenly and looked at me seriously, a look I hadn't seen before. "Nora, I know I'm just some guy you met at a cafe, but these past weeks have been, I don't know, different. Better. Because of you." I stopped too, unsure how to respond. Feelings were not what I planned on dealing with here. "Daniel, I like hanging out with you, I do. But this is just a break for me. I'm not looking for complications." He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I get it. No pressure. Just know that I'm here, okay? And I think you're pretty amazing." Days turned into weeks, and my time in Monte Carlo was drawing to a close. Daniel and I spent more and more time together, and what started as casual walks and talks turned into late-night dinners and early morning breakfasts. It was the last thing I expected, falling for someone under the Mediterranean stars. Then, one evening, he dropped a bombshell. "Come back with me, Nora. Work at my company in the States. I know it's sudden, but I don't know, I just think it could be great." The idea was crazy. Completely insane. And yet, part of me was tempted. Tempted by the adventure, by the idea of taking this whatever it was, and seeing where it could go. Moving back to the States felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Daniel's offer wasn't just a job, it was an invitation into his life, and suddenly, I was living in an ordinary apartment in an ordinary part of town, playing the role of an ordinary girl who'd lucked out. My father, however, had different ideas about ordinary. He showed up unannounced one afternoon, just as I was unpacking my last box. His booming laugh filled my small living room as he stood in the doorway, towering and larger than life. "Nora. Hiding out in plain sight, huh?" He chuckled, giving me a big hug that almost crushed my ribs. "So, tell me about this decision. This guy must be something special for you to up and move like this." His tone was light, but I could tell he was probing, doing his fatherly duty, to sniff out any trouble. I sighed, sitting down on the couch. "His name's Daniel. He's different, Dad. He doesn't know about all this," I said, waving vaguely around, implying the wealth and the complicated strings that came with it. Dad sat down next to me, his expression serious now. "Nora, you know you can't keep that a secret forever. If he's going to be part of your life, he should know who you are." "I know, Dad. I want to be sure about him before I complicate things. Thanks for looking out for me, though." He ruffled my hair like he used to when I was a kid. "Always, kiddo. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm just a call away. And I've got eyes everywhere," he added with a wink. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjusting to my new job and new life. Daniel was a constant presence, supportive and as charming as ever. But there was an edge to him now, a sort of sharpness that came with the responsibilities he carried. One night, over a quiet dinner at my place, Daniel brought up a topic I'd been dreading. "Nora, when do you think I'll get to meet your parents? I feel like I'm missing a big part of your life." I paused, the weight of the moment settling over me. "Well, my mom passed away a long time ago, and, my dad's just a regular trucker. We're not exactly on speaking terms right now." Daniel frowned, a hint of concern crossing his face. "I'm sorry to hear that. But you know, whenever you're ready, I'd like to meet him. Family is important." I nodded, appreciating his sentiment but knowing full well the reality of my father's world, a world I wasn't ready to introduce Daniel to just yet. Life with Daniel moved at a pace I never expected. We were already blending our lives together, my job at his company was going great, and we were getting deeper into our relationship. I guess it all seemed like we were gearing up for something big, but I was still taken aback when that big moment actually happened. It was a normal evening. We were at his place, a cozy, upscale apartment with views of the city skyline. We'd just finished dinner, nothing fancy, just some takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. We were sitting on the couch, a documentary about ocean life playing in the background, the kind you watch but don't really watch. Daniel turned to me, his expression more serious than the situation called for. He took my hand, and suddenly, I felt my heart start to race. "Nora, I've been thinking about us, about everything we've been through, and everything I want for us in the future." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah? I love you, Nora. I love everything about you, and I don't want to imagine my life without you." He paused, and I could see him swallow hard, like he was nervous. "That made two of us. I want to be with you, always. Will you marry me?" Just like that. No getting down on one knee, no ring box being opened. It was straightforward, genuine, and so very Daniel. "Yes," I said, the word coming out in a rush, almost a relief. "Yes, I will." He grinned, that wide, infectious grin that had won me over from day one, and hugged me tight. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our future, what we wanted, where we saw ourselves. It was exciting and a bit daunting, but it felt right. The next challenge came when I told my dad. I expected him to be happy, but his response was lukewarm at best. "Nora, you know I want nothing but your happiness, but are you sure about this? It's all happening so fast," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "I'm sure, Dad. He's a great guy. You'll see." I tried to sound more confident than I felt. He sighed. "All right, but promise me you'll sign a prenup. Just to be safe." The word prenup didn't scare me. It was just another part of the modern marriage package, especially with someone who had as much to lose as I did, even if Daniel didn't know the full extent of it. "Of course, Dad. We'll handle it," I assured him. "That's good then. And Nora, I won't be at the wedding. I don't want to spoil your story about being a simple girl." Then came the introduction to Daniel's mother. Her reception was icy from the start. During dinner at their family home, she scrutinized me with a look that chilled the room. "Daniel, are you sure about this girl? She doesn't seem like a fit for our family," she remarked bluntly. Daniel tried to smooth things over, but his mother was relentless. "A prenuptial agreement is non-negotiable," she insisted. I agreed without hesitation, knowing it would ease some tension. "Absolutely, I wouldn't have it any other way," I said as we later formalized the terms with a lawyer present. Despite these hurdles, our wedding in the Maldives was breathtaking. Standing beside Daniel, with the ocean whispering behind us and the sand beneath our feet, I felt a surge of hope. It was just us, our love, and a future we were ready to shape together, despite the rocky start with family expectations. Married life started off better than I could have hoped. Daniel and I settled into our new house, a beautiful place with more space than we'd ever need. It was supposed to be the beginning of our perfect life together. I threw myself back into work, determined to prove that I was more than just the boss's wife. My role at the company had always been challenging, but now there was an added layer of expectations. I was not only managing projects, but was also part of key decision-making processes. Daniel seemed proud, at least initially. He would introduce me in meetings with a hint of pride in his voice. "This is Nora, my wife and our project lead." However, as the months rolled on and the projects under my lead turned successful, bringing in significant profits and boosting the company's profile, something in Daniel shifted. It was subtle at first. A comment here, a slight remark there. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, he brought it up. "Nora, you're doing great at work." "Too great, maybe." I looked up from my plate, puzzled. "What do you mean, too great? Isn't that good for the company?" "It is," he admitted, pushing his food around on his plate. "But, you know, the guys are starting to say it's turning into Nora's show over there." His words stung a little. "Isn't that a bit unfair? I thought you'd be happy that we're doing well." "I am happy, but it's a lot, you know? Everyone's always talking about you, about how you handle things. Makes me wonder where I stand." That conversation was the first of many. As the business grew, so did the strain between us. Daniel's once supportive demeanor was now tinged with resentment. I couldn't understand it. Wasn't he the one who had encouraged me to step up in the first place? Things got worse when his mother came to stay with us for a few weeks. Her presence in the house brought an old-world, traditional attitude that I had always managed to avoid. She would make offhand comments about my work, about how a wife should be more present at home. "You're always at the office, Nora. When do you have time to take care of your husband?" she would say. I tried to shrug it off, to keep the peace, but her words only deepened the growing rift between Daniel and me. It seemed no amount of success at work could compensate for what was slowly unraveling at home. The more I achieved, the more our marriage suffered. One evening, Daniel came home from work, his face set in a grim line. "Nora, I think it's best if you leave the company. We need to focus on our family, and it seems like your role there it's just causing too much tension." "Leave the company? But why? I've been contributing so much." My voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "It's for the best. You can focus on the house, maybe start that garden you've always talked about?" His tone was dismissive, as if he was deciding on something trivial, not my career. The next day, I found out he had let go of all our house staff, housekeepers, cooks, gardeners. It was all on me now. "You wanted to be more involved at home, here's your chance," he said, almost coldly. I wasn't scared of housework, but the way this was thrown at me felt wrong. This wasn't the loving, caring man I married, this was someone else, someone very intolerant and controlling. His mother, staying with us at the time, seemed to relish the situation. "It's good for a wife to focus on her home," she would say, smirking slightly whenever Daniel talked about my new role as a full-time housewife. As I adjusted to this unexpected turn in my life, I couldn't help but feel ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen this coming, ashamed to admit to my father that maybe he was right about Daniel. When Daniel suggested a trip to Monte Carlo, to maybe light up what was left of our spark, I was hesitant but hopeful. That hope died quickly when his mother announced she'd join us. "It's been ages since I've traveled," she declared loudly, as if it were a decree that couldn't be opposed. Daniel, of course, welcomed her with open arms, not once considering what I might think. We rented a small house in Monte Carlo, which was charming but costly, and it quickly became my prison rather than a retreat. From the start, Daniel and his mother treated the city as their playground. They rented luxurious cars, visited exclusive boutiques, and dined at the finest restaurants, while I was left to manage the household. They demanded home-cooked meals, turning me into nothing more than a servant in a holiday home, cooking and cleaning after them as they gallivanted around the city. As days passed, Daniel's mother's digs grew sharper, her tone more venomous. "Really, Nora, living at someone else's expense must be quite the life, huh?" she'd sneer, her words a slap disguised in a smirk. Daniel never defended me. Instead, he laughed. His laughter was a betrayal each time, echoing around the cold walls of our temporary home. I felt isolated, the city's sparkle muted by the shadow of their disdain. One evening, we passed a grand old-style hotel, its facade a reminder of a world of elegance and respect. Daniel's mother, her voice dripping with envy, remarked, "Lucky billionaire Harris. Imagine owning such a hotel, ruling over a palace like that." That night, at a restaurant overlooking the sea, the last vestige of my patience crumbled. As we sat down, she waved the waiter over with an imperious flick of her wrist. "For Nora, the cheapest dish will do. No need to spoil her with extravagances she doesn't deserve," she declared loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Daniel's response was a chuckle, his agreement coming not just from his mouth, but from the dismissive flip of his hand. "Good call, Mom. Let's not go overboard." Humiliation washed over me like the waves crashing on the rocks below us. Rising from my chair, the clatter of my seat echoing my turmoil, I faced them both, my voice steady, louder than I intended. "I will not tolerate this any longer," I declared, my hands trembling, but my resolve firm. "I am divorcing you, Daniel." The cold air of Monte Carlo was nothing compared to the chill of betrayal as I walked away from the restaurant. Daniel and his mother, rather than coming to apologize, followed me out with insults. As I quickened my pace, my mother-in-law's voice rang out sharp and clear. Just look at her, a beggar, unworthy of my son. My heart raced, but before I could get far, Daniel caught up and grabbed my purse from my shoulder, his fingers clenching it tightly. This is my money, Nora. Go on, get out on all fours if you have to. His voice was laced with contempt as he yanked the purse away, leaving me stunned on the sidewalk. Beside him, his mother laughed cruelly, her eyes gleaming with malice. Maybe now you'll learn to beg in Monte Carlo, since that's all you're good for. Their laughter echoed down the street as I stood there, walletless and alone. But as they hurled their final insults, fate stepped in. We were near that grand old hotel, the one Daniel's mother had earlier envied aloud, wishing she could own such a place. Pointing to the hotel, she sneered. Maybe they'll let you in as a beggar. At that moment, the gates of the hotel opened, and a guard appeared. He saw me, recognition lighting up his face. Miss Harris, he called out warmly, walking over with a respectful salute. The moment he said my name, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel and his mother paused, their expressions turning from satisfaction to confusion. The guard smiled broadly. Your father told us you might come by. Please, this way. The best room is always reserved for you, as per Mr. Harris's instructions. Daniel's mother's face paled, her earlier words turning to ash in her mouth. Harris? As in the billionaire Harris? She stammered, her earlier bravado crumbling. Ignoring them both, I walked towards the guard, my posture straightening. Thank you, Pierre, I said, my voice calm and collected. Inside, I felt a mix of relief and vindication. Behind me, Daniel's pleas began, his tone desperate. Nora, please, I didn't mean. His mother, not to be outdone, shouted past her son. Perhaps we could come in for a drink, at least? I didn't look back. Entering the hotel, the doors closing behind me felt symbolic, shutting out the chaos of my old life. Pierre escorted me to the reception, where staff greeted me with the deference due to the daughter of their employer. The flight back to the United States was a long one, giving me plenty of time to ponder over my next steps. By the time I landed, my resolve had hardened like the city sidewalks, ready to be trodden upon but unyielding to the pressure. The following day, I found myself in the office of a reputable lawyer, papers spread out before me like a battle map. During your tenure at the company, it appears your husband failed to pay you bonuses owed for the multi-million-dollar deals you closed, the lawyer pointed out, his tone a mix of surprise and indignation. That sounds about right, I sighed, my mind racing through the countless hours I'd poured into that company, the success I had driven. We're suing for $3 million. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the heated glares Daniel shot across the room. As he stood there, fumbling through his defense, the man I once loved looked nothing short of pathetic. When the verdict came, a resounding victory awarding me $3 million, Daniel's face crumpled. Outside the courthouse, he attempted one last plea. Nora, everyone's laughing at me. I messed up. Can we start over? His words could have tugged at my heartstrings once, but that time had passed. You only miss the money, Daniel. Maybe listen less to your mother next time, I said, the edge in my voice cutting through the crisp air. I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels against the pavement marking the end of that chapter. Returning home, I faced my father. The air between us was thick with unspoken words until I broke the silence. Dad, I should have listened to you. He wrapped me in a hug, his embrace warm and forgiving. You had to learn on your own. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. We talked late into the night, about life, mistakes, and new beginnings. His advice was a beacon as I navigated through my thoughts of the future. Inspired by our conversation, I began laying the groundwork for my next venture. My experience at Daniel's company had not only honed my skills, but ignited a passion for the industry I couldn't deny. I decided to open my own investment firm. With my expertise and the hefty settlement, I had the resources to start something meaningful, something mine. Weeks turned into months as I built my business from the ground up. The challenges were daunting, but every setback taught me a lesson, every success a confirmation that I was on the right path. Sitting in my new office, overlooking the bustling streets below, I realized how far I'd come. From a disillusioned wife in a loveless marriage to a competent business owner, the journey had been fraught with hurdles, but each one had made me stronger.